So my name is Dean DeBlois, and I am the writer and director and executive producer of the Dragon Trilogy.
How did you start your career in animation?
Well, I'm from Canada. I grew up in Quebec, but I went to college at Sheridan College, which is just outside of Toronto. They have a very famous animation program, and I learned to do hand-drawn 2D traditional animation. From there, I was hired to go to Ireland to work with Don Bluth on several feature films from 1990 to 1994. And then in 94, I left to join Disney. The first film that I worked on there was Mulan, and I was in the story department. So I met Chris Sanders, who was at the time the head of the story department. As we worked together, Chris eventually left to go develop a film to direct, and I completed the job of head of story on Mulan, but later joined Chris on that film he was developing, which became Lilo and Stitch. So that was our first chance to write and direct a film together.
Lilo and Stitch had a small budget. Was that more of a limitation or a challenge?
It was both. It was both because we realized that we could make a movie that was a little bit riskier and different for Disney, but the price was that we had to make it faster and cheaper. So we got the whole crew together. We made the movie in Florida, and we said, okay, how do we make this movie together? We have less money, less time, but we also want everybody to go home on the weekends, and we want to see our families, and we want to rest and not get sick and have divorces. So we figured out how to do it in such a way that hopefully the audience wouldn't notice. So for example, we couldn't afford shadows on characters, and so most of the movie takes place in the shade of a tree or something. Just we had to find creative solutions to make the workload less taxing.
Lilo is a very pure, authentic and true character. How did you manage to bring her to the screen?
I think, well, both Chris and I grew up with sisters. So we had little sisters, and we channeled a lot of like little girl behavior that we observed into Lilo. But I think Lilo also reflects us, our sensibility. She's kind of interested in dark things or strange things. Like one example is Chris Sanders used to think it was cute that I like chubby people, and so he made that quality something that Lilo would like be a fan of chubby people, always taking pictures of fat people. and so he loved Elvis, and so we would make her like a fan of Elvis, and he loved monster movies, and so she would be. So there's all these kind of qualities that we enjoy that we would fill up with the character, but she had to be tough and kind of an equal to Stitch, because we knew Stitch was like all instinct and destructive, but it couldn't be that she was just going to be easy to push around, a little girl, adopting this dangerous alien, only to realize like she's pretty tough herself. It's fun.
What is the origin of the story of Lilo and Stitch?
Well, it started with Chris Sanders had an idea for a children's book in the 80s that he never ended up making. But the story was of a creature that didn't know where he came from, but he found himself in this forest in North America, and all of the animals of the forest were afraid of it, and so it was very lonely. No one would communicate with him, and so he learned to speak by mimicking the sound of the water in the river or the wind moving through the trees, and so it was just a story of a very lonely character who was terrifying to everyone. And yeah, he never made the book, but when he was asked to come up with ideas to pitch at Disney, he brought out that idea and began to shape it from there. And so at first it was a story of instead of forest animals, it was a boy and this creature and it took place in kind of middle America somewhere like Kansas. And then it became, oh, Hawaii. Well, that's like those small islands. You could tell a story where it's a very contained, finite place. And it has a culture of its own. It's very beautiful. And then the little girl came into the story. And so it was a slow evolution.
What inspired you about Hawaiian culture?
We went to Hawaii to do a research trip. So while we were like swimming, snorkeling in the water and listening to the palm trees, what we began to discover, we had a guide, a Hawaiian guide who would take us all around the islands. And it seemed like he knew everybody, everywhere we went. But in fact, it's kind of this cultural mentality where everybody in Hawaii is a cousin. Like complete strangers you've never met before is like they call them cousins. And if somebody's car broke down on the side of the road, even it's a complete stranger, you stop and help them change their car or give them a ride or help people out. And so they look after one another. And that's why Ohana is like this big family feeling for the people of Hawaii. And we found that was really beautiful. And it became like a strong theme to this story, that you could create your own family, even for a character like Stitch who didn't have one. You know, that the family is what you make it.
Both Lilo and Hiccup, the protagonists of How to Train Your Dragon, are somewhat strange and misunderstood characters. Why did you choose to continue with this theme?
It actually started with Mulan. We discovered something with Mulan when we were creating that character, that for a long time it was about a girl who wanted to get out of her traditional life. She didn't want to be, groomed to be a bride and to live very dutifully. And so when the war happened and she saw an opportunity to enlist in the army as a boy, she disguised herself and went. She was like going to, make her own path. And that character was never as appealing as a girl who really wanted to make her family proud. And she wanted to do the right thing, she just couldn't. She just wasn't well equipped to do that. And when this war notice came, and the father was going to have to go to war, she did it for him. She did it to protect him, even though she knew it would make him ashamed of her. So that became, what we learned from that is it's more interesting for an audience to relate to and root for a character who is trying to be the right thing, somebody else's definition of the right thing, but they're never going to be that. And so it makes the audience wish for them to have an experience where they will discover it's okay to be you. So we used that with Lilo, we used that with Hiccup, this kind of characters that are trying to fit into the world, but they just don't fit. And people reject them, but they keep trying and keep trying. So it's something that is kind of a winning thing there for the audience. Because I think a lot of the audience sees themselves in that position.
Hiccup grows throughout the trilogy. What it's like watching a character grow?
Yeah, I think it's nice. It's an uncommon thing in animation, and it was a nice challenge. But ultimately I suggested it because we needed a new problem for Hiccup for the second film. And after the first film, when he was 14 or 15 years old, he didn't have a problem because he had his father who loved him, he had the town that respected him, he had the attention of Astrid, the girl that he had a crush on, he had an amazing dragon, and he ended a war between Vikings and dragons. So there was no organic problem to start a second movie with. But by making him a little bit older, okay, now here's a problem everybody goes through, when they have to become a grown-up and stop being a child and take on the serious problems and trying to figure out who you are, as an adult, and not just what everyone wants you to be. It's also, I should say, for the third film, for me, it was what made it special is that I grew up with movies where characters would come together and have a real impact on one another, but then eventually would have to part. Like E.T. or The Fox and the Hound or Harold and Maude. These sorts of movies had a big emotional impact on me. So I saw this as an opportunity to do that, to tell a story in 3 parts, but in the end, the circumstance that brought them together and transformed their lives, both Hiccup and Toothless, would eventually have to come to an end, and they would have to part, but that they're never going to be the same again. Hiccup is always changed by that experience he had with his dragon. His dragon will always be changed by the experience he had with his human. So I think it's kind of a beautiful theme in life. People come and they go, but they leave an impact.
In the first How to Train Your Dragon movie, Hiccup becomes powerful thanks to Toothless, while in the third film, he must find strength within himself.
Yeah, that was kind of the intention of the third movie as the third act of this story, because Hiccup recognized that he was just a failure in the beginning. But when he met Toothless made him powerful and made him important and made him able to change the minds of his fellow Vikings and change the world. And so together they've had this relationship of becoming chiefs, like Toothless is the chief of the dragons, Hiccup is the chief of the Vikings. They're leading this peaceful charge in the world. They're making great changes. But I always wanted to get to the point at which, once Hiccup has defined himself based upon Toothless, what happens if Toothless goes? Will he become that failure of a person he was in the beginning? That's his greatest fear, and so it really challenges him to answer that question. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially parents. Parents who raise their children and they're so protective and kind of nurturing and protecting. For a lot of parents, they become defined by their children. And when their children leave and go to college or start their lives, there's a moment of like, who am I now? I've spent 20 years looking after this person and making them my priority. And now that they're gone, I don't know what I do with my life, who I am. So I think it's something that a lot of parents in the audience could relate to, that idea.
The gaze when Hiccup looks at the sky where Toothless flew after healing him is very beautiful.
That's the power of a great animator. I love that about animation, is that sometimes you don't need the dialogue. You can just leave it to an expression and a little bit of pantomime acting.
And for the music, how do you decide when to give it space and not use dialogue?
Well, I think that I've come to realize that music is like half of the equation. It's half of the storytelling. And I think once I realized that, I became very conscious of trying to create large chunks within the story that would be driven entirely by the music, with no dialogue, very, very little dialogue if possible. And it always turns out that those are the moments that people like the most. They seem like, oh, that's special, that feels like kind of lifts you up, or it becomes iconic for the film. So yeah, I've just come to very much trust the composer. And John Powell he's a really great storyteller on his own. He sees themes in the material that I'm not even aware of. For example, in the second film, I was explaining to him, well, here's what the movie's about. It's about Hiccup trying to discover for himself who he is. He knows he's not his father, and he discovers that he isn't really his mother either. He's this other thing. And he said, well, I thought the movie was about lost and found, because everybody in the movie is either lost and trying to find themselves, or they've become lost, or they're finding one another. And that's the score that he wrote. He wrote a score about lost and found, and it works as a harmony to what I was doing. So it's like a support, and it gives more depth and kind of counterpoint sometimes. But it's a really powerful thing, music.
What is your personal definition of animation?
Well, I think animation is the art of exaggerating realism. That's why, I have a problem with movies like the new Lion King, because it strives so much for photoreal that by making it so photoreal, they restrict themselves in being able to push expressions and communicate emotion. So I think that animation, it can, like music, it transcends, it leaps above reality, and so it's the art of exaggerating emotions, expressions, actions, so that they become kind of something else. They become whimsical. They become more emotional than perhaps the photographed performance could be. So when it works.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.